And so I love that God's response to Gideon was not, okay, I'll do it. But God is saying, no, I am sending you to be that solution for your people. And so for us today, I think instead of asking the question, why is this happening? I think a better question to ask God is, God, how can I help? Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of House on the Rock. It says in Matthew chapter 7, verse 24, "Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock." Here on this podcast, we go through the Bible book by book, a little bit every day, in hope that by doing so, that all of us can be like that house that is built on the solid foundation, and that is Christ. We are currently going through the book of Judges, and in the previous episode, we finished all of chapter 5, where we get to read about a song of victory that the Israelites sang after they had a great victory against the people of Canaan. And in that episode, we talked about the different signs of how to recognize that the enemies are attacking us. And we had talked about how the enemies will not only want to keep us in fear, but he will also try to disarm us so that we cannot fight back. And so we talked about the different signs on how to recognize that that is happening. And in today's episode, we are going to start with chapter 6, and we're only going to read from verse 1 through verse 24, I believe. Yes. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Verse 1. The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and for 7 years he gave them into the hands of the Midianites. Because the power of Midian was so oppressive, the Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in mountain clefts, caves, and strongholds. Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern peoples invaded the country. They camped on the land and ruined the crops all the way to Gaza, and did not spare a living thing for Israel, neither sheep nor cattle nor donkeys. They came up with their livestock in their tents like swarms of locusts. It was impossible to count them or their camels. They invaded the land to ravage it. Midian so impoverished the Israelites that they cry out to the Lord for help. When the Israelites cry out to the Lord because of Midian, he sent them a prophet who said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought you up out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I rescued you from the land of the Egyptians, and I delivered you from the hand of all your oppressors. I drove them out before you and gave you their land. I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you live. But you have not listened to me." And we're going to go ahead and stop right there. And so again, we see the cycle continues where, yes, the Israelites just experienced this great battle and they had peace for 40 years, but now they're back in the cycle where they've fallen back into sins, and God's given them into the hands of the Midianites. And the Midianites basically destroy all of the crops that the Israelites had planted. And so this just means that the Israelites are left with no food, no resources. And so they became so impoverished that they cry out to God. And then God, in response, sent a prophet to deliver a message from him to his people. And we haven't gotten there yet, but in the following verses, we're going to see how God is going to raise up another judge to deliver the Israelites from the hands of the Midianites. And so as we read this, and you're going to see this a lot throughout the book of Judges, because again, there is this theme where there is a cycle that the Israelites are stuck in. But I remember reading this the first time, and I just get so frustrated at the Israelites because I am just in awe of how they would continually fall back into sins despite all the ways that God has warned them, all the ways that God rescued them. And God corrected me when I started feeling that way, and He basically showed me that I am in the same position as them, because I still live in this flesh, that even though I've been saved by God, my flesh sometimes overtakes my spirit and will cause me to sin and fall back into sins. And so, I am not exempted from this pattern of sins, even though now with the blood of Christ and with the cross and what He has done for us, that I truly can say I have power over it, and it does get better every time. But again, God corrected me right then and there and just showed me that I am not in a position to put judgment on these people. But one of the things that God has also showed me this time around when I went back and reread this chapter of Judges is that when I see God's heart for His people, I am called to do the same to those around me today. And what I mean by that is, despite their rebellion, despite their constant backsliding, God continued to show His grace to them, and His heart breaks when He sees His people in anguish. And so that brought up a question for myself that I have to answer, which is, what is my attitude when I see those around me suffer? Do I have the same heart as God, where my heart breaks for them and I want to help them? Or is my attitude of apathy, where I just think, that's not my responsibility? Or is my attitude something along the line of, well, they brought that on themselves, that's not my job to fix it for them? And I think this time around, God really helped me see that we are not called to only receive this kind of grace, but we're also called to extend the same grace to others. And so when I look around, I see people are hurting, I need to make sure that I do what God would do, and that is, I need to step into actions and reach out and tell them about God, to reach out and pray for them, reach out and help them see the truth and help lift them up out of the situation that they are in, instead of just sitting back and watching it unfold, because that would not be the calling that God has for us, and that would not be very Christ-like of us, because Jesus wouldn't do that. Jesus wouldn't just watch His people suffer, but He would step into action and He would rescue them. And we are not called to be the rescuer. We are just called to point people to the rescuer, and that is Jesus. And so we will keep on going to verse 11. The angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak of Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." "Pardon me, my lord," Gideon replied, "but if the Lord is with us, why has all of this happened to us? Where are all His wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian." The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" "Pardon me, my lord," Gideon replied, "but how can you save Israel? How can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." Then the Lord answered, "I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive." And so what we can see from these several verses is that we can already learn some of the characters that Gideon has. And one of those things is that he is a little bit on the fearful side, because we see in verse 11 that when the angel of the Lord came to him, he was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. So he was basically in hiding, and we haven't read this yet, but if we keep going, we're going to see that he's also a very doubtful person, and that's going to reveal itself in the remaining of chapter 6 and chapter 7. We also see in verse 15 that he belongs to a clan that is the weakest in the tribe of Manasseh, and that he is the least in his family. And so we see from that reinforce the idea that we have been talking about in the previous couple episodes, and that is God really does love to use those who have weaknesses so that he can display his strength through them. But we also see something very interesting in verse 13 14, and that is Gideon is coming to God and he's asking God, if the Lord is really with us, then why is this happening? And so I think that is something that a lot of us ask ourselves today, where we look around, we see so many injustice and we see so much pain and suffering, and we ask God, if God is really with us, then why is all of this happening? And so this is a very legitimate question, but I love God's response back to Gideon. He said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" So basically, God is replying back to Gideon, I understand where you're coming from and I see your frustration. I am sending you to be the solution to those problems that you just brought up to me. And so I think for us today, when we look around and we see that there are so many problems around us, and we see so many injustices and pain and suffering, I wonder if we would have the faith to see that the solution to those things is us, that God has put us in this world for the very purpose of being a light in the darkness, of being the salt of the earth. And so I love that God's response is not to Gideon was not, okay, I'll do it. But God is saying, no, I am sending you to be that solution for your people. And so for us today, I think instead of asking the question, why is this happening? I think a better question to ask God is, God, how can I help? And so we're going to keep going on to verse 17, and we're going to stop at verse 24, and that will be the last section of today's episode. Gideon replied, "If now I have found favor in your eyes, give me a sign that it is really you talking to me. Please do not go away until I come back and bring my offering and set it before you." And the Lord said, "I will wait until you return." Gideon went inside, prepared a young goat, and from an ephah of flour he made bread without yeast. Putting the meat in a basket with its broth in a pot, he brought them out and offered to him under the oak. The angel of the Lord said to him, "Take the meat and the unleavened bread, place them on this rock, and pour out the broth." And Gideon did so. Then the angel of the Lord touched the meat and the unleavened bread with the tip of the staff that was in his hand. Fire flares from the rock, consuming the meat and the bread, and the angel of the Lord disappeared. When Gideon realized it was the angel of the Lord, he exclaimed, "Alas, sovereign Lord, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." But the Lord said to him, "Peace, do not be afraid. You are not going to die." So Gideon built an altar to the Lord there and called it "The Lord is Peace." To this day, it stands in Ophrah, the Abiezrites. So we see here a little bit more of Gideon's character, and that is he's pretty doubtful, even though the angel of the Lord is saying all these things to him and assuring him that God is sending Gideon to be the rescuer for his people and that God is going to back him up. He asked for a sign from God. And this is actually not the only time that Gideon is asking for a sign from God. We're going to see later on in the rest of chapter 6 that he's going to ask for 2 more signs from God, just to really confirm that this is God and that God is really going to go with him. And so we see here that Gideon isn't perfect. He has a lot of doubt and he has a lot of fear. And one really interesting thing about the book of Judges is that throughout this book, every time God would send another judge, each subsequent judge gets quote unquote worse. And what I mean by that is we're going to see that there are more flaws in their characters. We're going to see that they're more doubtful, a little bit less reliable every time. And we talked about in the previous episode that God really used the imperfect to bring about his glory. But we see that each judge that he would send in this book of Judges, as the story progresses, they get worse every time. And that is not to say that God doesn't have great taste or great choice in the leaders that he chooses, but rather it shows us the declining depravity of his people during this time. That not only that the people were corrupt, but the leaders themselves were also corrupted. That even though it started out really well, with Deborah and Othniel, and even a little with Gideon too, despite his flaws, he was still a pretty good judge. That we see each subsequent judge really does get worse. And so we see that the cyclical sins are sort of spreading, not just within the people, but to the leadership as well. And so all of this, when we get to the end of Judges, and you'll see, it leaves us with this hanging question of, if this is the case, if not only people are corrupted, but leaders are corrupted, then what is the hope for the rest of us? And ultimately, all of it point to Jesus, the ultimate judge, because unlike these judges, he was perfect, he was pure, he was whole, he obeyed his Father till the very end, even to the point of death, as the Bible pointed out for us, that Jesus doesn't have any character flaws, that he continued to be faithful. Instead of doubt, he had faith. Instead of questionable character, he was humble, he was pure, he was sinless. And instead of being unreliable, he died for those who abandoned him and who did not love him back. And so even though we're gonna see the declining, character of all the judges that God used in this book, I think it pushed us to look upon Jesus, who is the ultimate judge, who is the judge that we all need. And so that sort of conclude our last section for today's episode. I am really excited to get to the rest of chapter 6 in the next episode with you all and get to see more of what God has in store for us. And before I let you guys go, let's go ahead and pray out. Father, thank you for this day. I thank you for your word that you've given us today. I thank you that you've taught us so many lessons through the story of Gideon, Lord, that even though he was imperfect, you still use him to deliver your people. We see your heart for your people, that despite our rebellion, you continue to chase after us. And so I ask that you will use the grace that we have been given to motivate us to extend that same grace to others, to have your heart for others, that when we see a broken world, that we would be mobilized to go out and be the answer to the issues, to the problems that we're seeing today, Lord. I thank you for all the things that you're continuing to teach us through the book of Judges. I thank you that everything we read ultimately point back to you, point back to the one true King, Jesus Christ. And so, Lord, as we live out our day today, we continue to look to you. We continue to strive to be more like you, and we continue to live out a life that you have called us to live, God. We give this day into your hands, and we give you all the glory. We pray for all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you so much for joining me today, guys. Have a good one.